was coming back in, before he even announced or anything else, I called him up and said, what day can you be here in June? We are set on this date because he can be here today. So it was really important for us to have him back, and I know that you will really enjoy and appreciate his wisdom, his experience, his vision, and his energy as we start moving forward with the Mass Forum 7 graduating this year and our 4th annual Healthy Communities Conference. He is going to be a motivating person for us to start getting renewed in our energy and our desire to move forward. So I'm pleased to introduce Tyler Norris. And Kathy's also going to do an introduction.
We're really happy to have Tyler here again to set us on our additional course and then down our new pathway to the work that we're going to do for the next 15 years. So Tyler, we're really glad to have you here, and welcome.
Thank you very much for that warm welcome, and it's a delight to be back here in the Commonwealth. You all should know that this state, 21 years ago, with Healthy Boston, led the nation in the translation of the European Healthy Cities model and its introduction to the United States. So we all across the country have an extraordinary debt of gratitude to this Commonwealth for what it has done to talk about how we translated that, not just the way the World Health Organization described, but what works in the American context, what works in our urban centers, what works in our rural communities. And so I just want to congratulate you for being the pace setter in the nation for the launch of the Healthy Communities movement. And through very difficult political and economic times, both in the state and across the country, for continuing to carry the lantern, continuing to hold the torch. And in that, you have been an extraordinary inspiration to many, many, many dozens and scores of communities across the country and many states who have been watching carefully and following. So congratulations to all of you for that role that you played. 21 years, and this frame, Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise. Now, we all know who that's attributed to, one of your own, right? What was he talking about? Yes. Early to bed, early to rise. Ben Franklin was a great scholar of the scripture, and he read Hebrew. And what he was referring to was not this practical get up early and be that. He was talking about the journey of Jacob, 21 years long, who originally went to Haran in Turkey, was exiled from his family, was in horrible adventures, 3 cycles of 7 years, and returned to his family whole in learning, whole in relation to community, and whole in spirit. And that is what was translated later by Ben Franklin into Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise. You too, I believe, are very much on that 21-year journey where you have a tremendous amount to offer, not only this current generation, Kathy, as you're talking about this kind of fresh moment for this movement, but for the country as being whole in learning and whole in your own health and whole in spirit. And I think that if we're going to be successful, it is going to require all of us, body, mind, spirit, and emotion intact, to be able to be the kind of leaders that we need to be to create the kind of changes that John and others are talking about. So I've been working in the Middle East, so I needed a camel story, right? I was told this by a sheikh in Syria about a man who died. And in his will to his kids, he'd said that half of everything he owned would go to his oldest, a third of everything he owned would go to his second oldest, and a ninth of everything he owned would go to his youngest. But he had 17 camels. The math doesn't work very well, so nobody knew what to do. Right? And so they went to a wise old woman, a sheikha in the village, who sat with them for a little bit and sat a little longer and listened to the conflict and fighting over it. What are they going to do? And who's going to trade? It was getting kind of messy. And she said, I have a solution for you. I'm going to give you a camel. Now all of a sudden they have 18 camels. The oldest one gets 9. The second one gets a third, gets 6, and the youngest, an 8th, gets 2, right? What does that add up to? 17. So she had an extra camel to give back to the old woman. So these are challenging times for a resource, and we have conflict, and we squabble, and we struggle over what ought to happen. But the question is, for the wise leader like the Sheikha, how do we do conflict? How do we see abundance? How do we use our generosity and our hospitality and our giving as the key to creating really an experience of abundance like she did? So I think that may be relevant to this day. So what I wanted to spend our time with together was a little bit on my listening to what you were wanting to catalyze and deliver. And I've noticed that there are at least 3 sorts of groups of folks here. There are folks working on the ground, in the actual work, in the community, sleeves rolled up, who are looking at those most intimate of connections with the community and organizations. There are also some of you that are running coalitions. And there are also those of you who are looking across the Commonwealth and looking at how do we not only support the community level change and policy at the city level and so forth, but how do we support policy level at the policy change at the state level as well. So I want to be able to address that and some of the things the Commissioner was just talking about around the default environments. I want to start by talking a little bit about the assets of this movement that you are part of and have helped lead over this time, as many of you may not have a sense of that role that you play in the larger movement. Talk about some of the vexing issues. And I also want to put a finger on some of the promising way forwards, both as it relates to the resources that the Commissioner was talking about that are coming, what some of those are, but how you want to be ready for that. How do we want to position ourselves in the state to be ready for those resources, and those of you in communities to be ready for it, and then if we have some time, a little bit of dialogue. So I like this photograph because for me it reminds me that the eyes of our children are upon us. So what's our job, really? To be good human beings, be generous, to do our work. But if I could go right to the punchline of what I think our biggest job is as leaders, embracing that part of our healthy, wealthy, and wise, is that it is not enough to just do a good job in our jobs. That given what we know, we need to be able to be policy and investment advisors for the future health and prosperity of the state and this country, and nothing less. Because I have every confidence that given the experience you have on the ground and what you're learning and how you're bringing the sectors together and what works, that you know how to create health, that we know how to create health, and we know the role that health plays in a prosperous Commonwealth and a prosperous country. And so part of our job is how do we regard ourselves? And as our young people are looking at us, are we courageous enough to say, yes, we do our jobs, and collectively we are courageous enough to advise on the policy and investments, not just that we're involved in, but for the rest of what goes on in our communities and in our economy, because that's what's needed. And that's the voice where we actually build healthy communities, not just in what we do, but in the other 98% of what's happening in our communities. So that's my punchline. Now, one of my mentors was a wonderful gentleman named Len Duell, and he was one of the folks who brought this idea of healthy cities from Europe to the United States. And in the early Healthy Communities Action Project, I found the slide when I was thinking about Len, he used to have this statement, let's start with Hammurabi, 4,000 years ago. And the reason I'm putting this ziggurat of Ur up here is that what has been true for us now has been true for 4,000 years, which is how do we create the health of people and places? How do you create a civilization? How, since the age of settled agriculture in this, do we actually build a civilization?